Slather that silicone and polish your masters, 'cause today we're making sprue molds. Ooh, yeah. Welcome back to the GarageQuest shop, everyone. Today we're doing a tutorial on how to make dice molds. And there are a few different types of dice molds. This is a cap mold. It's really useful for things like Petri method, things where you need a lot of surface space. But in general, it's not my favorite style of dice. Now, these here are sprue molds, and I really find that they do a great job at making consistent, really nicely shaped dice that require very little sanding. So let's get started. First of all, I have my master dice set here. You can see some of them are already all rigged up with toothpicks. But I've got a couple replacement dice here that I haven't drilled yet. And what we're going to do is just drill into the corner of one face and attach a toothpick with some super glue so it looks like this. Now, before we get started, it's really important you understand the angle at which you're drilling. You want the toothpick to be inserted such that when the toothpick is upright perfectly like this, the surfaces around the toothpick and at the bottom are not level. You want them to be angular so that bubbles can move quickly up towards the sprue, which is the space occupied currently by the toothpick. If you have a level face, unfortunately, bubbles don't travel up the sprue very well if they have to move across a level surface like this. You can see physics just doesn't do us any justice in that department. So you really want to make sure with each dice that you're putting it at a good angle. So I'm pulling out my Dremel tool and I'm using this tip here. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but I know that it is an engraver's tip. And now I'm going to turn it on and find a point on the face. I like to use the one face. I'm going to find a point on it that is very close to the edge, very close to the tip or the point of the dice, but is still on the face. And I'm just going to drill into that. I've done that, and now I'm taking a toothpick. I like to use these very thick toothpicks. You can find them on Amazon. And clip just a little bit of the pointed edge off so that I have a nice thick sprue. And then I put it into the hole to make sure that I've done my angle justice and it's going to fit. Then I measure about a thumb's length and trim the rest off. So now we have a really nice length sprue. Now I go ahead and pull the toothpick out and I'm going to get myself some super glue. This is what I'm using. Although if you're going to use super glue gel like this, be very minimal. Please use it sparingly. And then I'm going to go ahead and put it on the tip and around the edge of the tip of this toothpick just a little bit. No globbing. And then we're going to just insert it into the hole and hold it there for about a minute. You can blow on it. Make sure that no super glue spills out onto other faces of the dice, and we're going to let it sit for 24 hours. Now, of course, we're going to do that with the rest of the dice, and hey, look, it's been 24 hours and I've plugged in a hot glue gun. And I'm laying out little tiny cups. You can use Dixie cups or plastic cups like these. I'm pulling out my masters, which have now been sitting for 20 hours and are perfectly ready. That's my D2 there. And as you can see, everything is perfectly at a nice angle and ready to go. So I'm setting the big cup aside because that's for the D2. And I'm just going to start putting a mound of hot glue into the center of the cup. Just a little glob, and that's going to act as both something to support our dice, as well as it'll make the shape for a reservoir in our molds, which will be very beneficial to ensure that as the resin cures and shrinks a little, that there is still more resin to pour into the mold and fill that space. Essentially, it's going to help you not have any bubbles. So now I'm just filling up the rest of the cups with a little mound of hot glue, and then we're going to move on to grabbing some tape. The tape is for the D2 mold. This is how I do a D2 mold. It's not how everyone does it, but I make it easy on myself. I grab my D2 and I place it down on the sticky side of the tape face up, so the face is not sticky to the tape. And then I grab some scissors and I cut in a circle around the D2, leaving just a few centimeters of tape sticking out along the edge. And this is going to work great as a way to keep the D2 from jiggling around when you pour the silicone into the cup. This is not a way to stick it to the cup. So I want to make this very clear. I am not putting the sticky side down into the cup. I am putting it sticky side up, and the D2's face is up. It just helps keep it stable. All right, so now we are ready to go with that, and we can go ahead and pull out our dice. So now, as you can see, we're going to take a little bit of hot glue and attach it to the edge of the toothpick. Just a little bit. Make sure you don't have any hot glue strings sticking out of there. And then we're going to lower it down into the center of that mound and hold it for about 1 minute or until dry. You can blow on it if you like, or you can just sit and be patient, but you're going to want to hold it for a minute. And then we go ahead and do it to each and every dice in each and every cup. And the one thing you want to be cautious about when you're doing this is make sure that when you're putting these dice into the hot glue, that the toothpick is perfectly vertical. It's going straight up and down, centered, even if that means the dice is a little a kilter, because these are essentially the upside down version of what your mold is going to turn out to be, and we want air to be able to travel up through the sprue as easily as possible. So here's what it'll look like when you're done. Now slap on your glove and get out some Sorta Clear 37 silicone. I stir these up each with a different stick, and then I pour equal parts of part A and part B into their respective cups. And then we're going to go ahead and mix these two cups together in a really big bucket. Probably doesn't need to be this big, but this was the next best size without making a huge mess for me. So I'm putting it in this painter's bucket, and then I'm just going to whip it up, stir it for a couple minutes. Time is an issue, so be sure if you're using 37 to know your curing time. And then I've got this middle-sized cup that I'm going to pour it into. It was just too small to whip it inside this cup, but this cup is much better size for pouring from. So I'm transferring my silicone right in. And then I'm just going to pick up this cup and start pouring it into our molds. So as you're pouring, you want to be very careful. Be aware that you haven't knocked over your dice. Sometimes we think the hot glue is holding, and it's not. So do keep an eye on it and pour slowly. This way you're sure to fill any voids, and you really only need to pour as much as covers the dice completely. So there we go. That's one perfect mold filled. I give it a little tap, and then I'm going to go about filling the rest of the molds. Now, if I'm lucky, none of these will knock over, and they didn't, which means my hot glue held, and that's a good sign. Now I'm going to go ahead and put it into my D2, which is simple. And then I'm going to grab a tongue depressor and I'm going to just start popping any surface bubbles. It's really not that important, but sometimes those big surface bubbles somehow manage to escape the pressure of the pressure pot. So I'm just tapping large bubbles out. And now I just throw these into the pressure pot and wait 24 hours. Let's roll some B-roll. Okay, so it's been 24 hours and I've pulled these out of my pressure pot, and now I'm just going to use some scissors to cut 1, 2, sometimes 3 cuts down the edge of my cup, and then I remove the mold. Now, at this point, your hot glue has probably pulled the toothpick out. If not, be gentle. It's okay to leave the toothpick in if necessary. If not, we can always replace the toothpick next time. And they should look like this. Now we just need to cut the thing. So when you're cutting your molds open, what you're going to do is you want a really sharp blade, and you want to cut from the center hole, the sprue hole, along the edge of 2 faces of the dies. This is so that you don't scratch any of the faces and cause extra flashing that you'll have to sand out later. The better you do at this portion of the process, the better your dice will come out. And honestly, the less work you'll have to do on that end. Now, my razor blade, even though I just opened this and was brand new, was very blunt and frustrating. So bear with me as I make these cuts. But you should be gentle nevertheless. Now I go ahead and start at the center and pull outward. And then as I start getting closer and further down, I insert my blade through the cut and down towards the edge. And you're probably just not going to get this right your first batch of molds. Unfortunately, the first few times I did this, I definitely didn't manage to stay perfectly along the edge of the dice. And so, yeah, there were some cuts and I had to do a lot more sanding of my dice, and that's okay. So now I'm just rotating it, and I'm going to find an opposite edge that I can do the same cut to. So it looks like I like to poke where I see the point, the end of the edges, and then kind of draw my way up so I understand what I'm looking at. This is one of the reasons using translucent molds is really a good idea, which is why I use Sorta Clear 37. A lot of people use Sorta Clear 12. It's very hard to come by right now in the United States. And so I like 37, and honestly, it does a great job and I've never had any complaints. So I'm just going to continue making these gentle cuts, and you can pull it open and see if there's anything left and just gently touch it to cut away anything left. Now, as you can see, I had to do a little touch up there. It still looks like this guy is not going to pop out with those 2 cuts. So what I do is I look for one more edge that I can cut, extending the cut line I've already cut. How many times can I say cut? I decided to go ahead and do this one here. So I just start at the bottom point of the previous cut and make my way along another edge of the dice as carefully and gently as I can. All right, so now it looks like this dice popped out pretty well, so I'm not going to have to do it on both sides. That's basically it. That is how you make a mold. You are now ready to cast. So this is what they look like now that they're done. These beautiful translucent jelly wobblers are ready to have resin poured into them and to be taped up and thrown in the pressure pot so I can make my own dice. I hope this has been educational and entertaining for you. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.